Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something a little different. We're not just going to learn about a place, we're going to take a walk through it. A very long, very quiet walk through a city that, according to our only real source, was the most magnificent place on Earth before it all went wrong. We're going to Atlantis. But this isn't the dramatic disaster movie version with earthquakes and tidal waves. Not yet, anyway. This is the city in its golden hour, the late afternoon of its existence, just as the first, almost invisible cracks are starting to appear in its perfect, gleaming facade. I'll be honest, if you were just dropped there with your modern mind, you probably wouldn't survive the first day. Not from any danger, but from the sheer, overwhelming, almost suffocating sense of order. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really does help this little corner of the internet find other sleepy history explorers like you. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your city and the time in the comments below. It's always so fascinating to see this quiet global community we've built, all settling in for the night together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air here is different. It's clean, carrying the scent of salt from the vast ocean that surrounds this island kingdom. But it's also tinged with something else, something metallic and floral all at once. You're standing on the outer edge of the city proper, on a wide, paved road that feels unnaturally smooth beneath your feet. Before you lies the first great marvel of Atlantis, a sight that has baffled engineers and dreamers for centuries. The city isn't just a city, it's a set of perfect concentric rings. A wide ring of land, then a ring of water, then another ring of land, then another of water, culminating in a central island at its heart. It's a divine blueprint, a mandala carved into the earth itself. The story, as told by Plato, who is our only real guide on this journey, is that the god Poseidon himself sculpted this place for his mortal love, Clito. He broke the ground and let the sea rush in, creating these protective moats, a gesture of divine love and protection. But looking at it now, it feels less like a gift and more like a statement of absolute control. You start walking, your footsteps making a soft, rhythmic sound on the polished stone. You're heading for one of the immense bridges that connect the land rings. The bridge itself is an engineering wonder, wide enough for several chariots to pass abreast, though you see none. Instead, you see people, Atlanteans. They are tall, graceful, and they move with an unnerving purpose. Their robes are of a fine, shimmering fabric, dyed in colors that seem just a little too vibrant, a little too perfect. There's no mud on their sandals, no dust on their clothes. Everything is immaculate. You reach the first canal, the first ring of water. It's not a stagnant moat. The water flows with a gentle, controlled current. You can see ships with strange triangular sails gliding silently along, carrying goods from the outer world to the inner markets. They don't need to row or tack against the wind. The very water carries them where they need to go. This is a key feature Plato mentions. The canals were engineered to be a flawless transportation system. It's genius. It's also the first sign of a particular kind of arrogance, the belief that nature is not something to be lived with, but something to be tamed and improved upon. As you cross the bridge, you lean over the balustrade. The water is so clear you can see the canal floor, paved with the same strange, smooth stone. You even see pipes, made of that famous reddish glowing metal they call orichalcum, running along the bottom. This brings us to a small, almost trivial detail from the ancient account. The Atlanteans had two separate sources of water. One spring provided cold water, and another geothermal spring provided hot water. They piped this directly into homes and public bathhouses. Imagine a city thousands of years before Rome with hot and cold running water on tap. It's a luxury that speaks volumes. They didn't just live on the island, they commanded its very geology for their comfort. You continue your walk onto the next ring of land. This one is more populated. There are parks with trees planted in perfect geometric patterns and public squares where people gather. But the atmosphere is subdued. You see children playing, but their games are structured, almost ritualistic. You see artisans in their workshops, but they seem to be replicating identical designs with flawless precision, their creativity bound by a rigid aesthetic. There's a quiet hum of efficiency everywhere. The city is a perfect machine, and its people are becoming perfect components. Historians and philosophers still argued to this day, of course, whether Plato was describing a real lost civilization, perhaps the Minoans, whose society collapsed after a volcanic eruption, or if he was simply crafting a philosophical allegory about the ideal state versus a corrupt one. Standing here, in this beautiful, sterile city, you feel the weight of that question. This place feels real, but its perfection feels like a fable. It's the kind of perfection that leaves no room for happy accidents, for messy creativity, for the very human chaos that leads to growth. You look towards the center of it all, towards the central island that you can just barely see from here. On it, the great temple of Poseidon is said to be covered in silver, its pinnacles glinting with gold, a monument to their divine ancestor. But from this distance, it looks less like a place of worship and more like a corporate headquarters, a monument to themselves. The air grows a little cooler as the sun dips lower. The first crack in the moral foundation of Atlantis isn't a crime or an act of evil. It's this quiet, suffocating pride in their own flawless creation. The feeling of pride you observe is the thread we'll follow now as it begins to unravel. You leave the Grand Bridge behind and find yourself walking along a wide avenue on the second land ring. This area feels different from the outermost ring. It's more established, more permanent. This is where the old families live, the direct descendants of the first 10 kings. Their homes are not ostentatious palaces, but long, low-lying villas built from black and red stone, surrounded by gardens where the geometry is just as precise, but the flowers are older, their roots running deeper. It's here that you begin to truly understand the core principle of early Atlantean society. According to Plato's tale, the very fabric of their virtue was woven from their lineage. Poseidon, a god, fell in love with Cleito, a mortal. Their children, 5 sets of twin boys, were demigods. They were the perfect blend, possessing the wisdom and power of a god, tempered by the compassion and understanding of a human. This divine nature, this godly essence, was believed to be a literal, physical component of their being, passed down through their blood. For generations, this divine spark was strong. It guided their laws, their judgments, and their interactions with each other. They valued virtue above all else because their virtue was their divinity. But time is the ultimate solvent. As generations passed, these demigod lines began to intermarry with other inhabitants of the island, mortals of less distinguished, or perhaps purely human lineage. And with each union, with each new generation, the divine bloodline, the very essence of their greatness, was diluted. It was a slow, imperceptible process, like adding a single drop of fresh water to a cup of salt water day after day. At first, you wouldn't notice the change, but eventually, The salt is gone. You stop in a small, quiet square you've wandered into. In its center stands a series of statues, not of gods, but of the 10 founding kings. They're ancient, weathered by the salty air, yet their faces hold a serene, profound authority. A strange little detail that later historians would puzzle over is that the earliest Atlantean art often depicted the revered ancestors with eyes made from polished, deep blue lapis lazuli, meant to represent the color of the ocean depths from which their divine father came. It was a small, almost trivial marker of their heritage. But as you look around now at the Atlanteans passing by, you see none of that. Their eyes are intelligent, sharp, and proud, but they are the eyes of mortals. That mythic oceanic blue is gone, relegated to poetry and the stony gaze of long-dead kings. This is where the second crack appears. The memory of their divine origin remains, but the understanding of it has shifted. The first generations saw their bloodline as a profound responsibility. They had to live up to the God within them. Now, you see how their descendants, generations removed, view it as a privilege, a birthright. Their pride is no longer in their actions, but in their ancestry. They are great not because of what they do, but because of who their great-great-great-grandfather was. You see it in the way a father points out the lineage charts carved into the obsidian walls of a public hall. He's showing his young son their family's name, tracing it back through the centuries to one of the original 10. The boy puffs out his chest, not with a sense of duty, but with a nascent sense of entitlement. This is the subtle poison that is beginning to seep into the city's foundations. The shift from "we must be worthy of our heritage" to "our heritage makes us worthy, regardless of our actions."
Of course, historians and philosophers have endlessly debated whether Plato meant this dilution of blood literally. Was he, a man who lived centuries before the discovery of genetics, really proposing a biological theory for moral decay? Or was he using divine blood as a sophisticated metaphor for a society's founding ideals? Perhaps the divine nature was a set of core principles: humility, justice, wisdom, and a respect for the balance of nature. And the mortal blood was the inevitable creep of human greed, ambition, and the desire for comfort and luxury. Each generation, focused more on wealth and status, diluted the original code of ethics, until all that was left was the hollow shell of tradition. Standing in this quiet square, you realize it doesn't matter which interpretation is true. The result is the same. The people of Atlantis are beginning to forget the why of their greatness. They are polished, perfect, and prosperous, but they are becoming hollow. They worship the memory of a god in their veins while ignoring the fading whisper of his wisdom in their hearts. The sun sets further, and the famous red-glowing orichalcum street lamps begin to hum to life, casting a warm, beautiful, and deeply artificial light over the city. This light illuminates their perfect faces and their beautiful homes, but it cannot reach the growing shadow within. And it is this growing emptiness that will soon crave to be filled by something else, something heavy, shiny, and dug up from the dark.
The hum of the orichalcum lamps grows stronger as you leave the residential district of the old families and head towards the industrial heart of this land ring. The air changes again. The clean, salty scent is now mixed with something acrid and earthy, the smell of forges and deep earth. You're approaching the source of Atlantis's immense wealth, the very thing that made its architectural and engineering marvels possible: the mines. According to Plato's account, the island was rich in all manner of resources, but its most prized possession was orichalcum. He describes it as a metal that in that day was only a name, but then was something more than a name. A metal that flashed with a fiery reddish light and was second only to gold in value. You find the entrance to a mine shaft, not a crude hole in the ground, but an arched gateway, reinforced with bronze and carved with symbols of geological strata. The Atlanteans didn't just dig, they systematized, they studied, they mastered. You step inside, not into darkness, but into a tunnel illuminated by the very material they are extracting. Veins of raw orichalcum run through the rock, pulsing with a soft internal luminescence, like the embers of a dying fire embedded in the earth. The glow casts dancing shadows on the walls, making the miners look like spectral figures moving through a subterranean artery of the world. The miners themselves are a picture of efficiency. They use tools you don't recognize, devices that seem to hum and vibrate, cutting through the rock with an ease that feels unnatural. There's little chatter, just the rhythmic sound of their work. But as you watch them, you see something new. You see them pause to admire the raw, uncut ore. A worker holds up a particularly bright chunk, his face bathed in its red glow, filled not with the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, but with a raw, covetous awe. This isn't just a building material or a currency to them anymore. It's an object of reverence. This is where the third, and perhaps most significant, moral crack appears. The transition from valuing virtue to venerating wealth. The early Atlanteans, guided by their divine spark, saw wealth as a tool, a means to an end. It was for building temples to honor the gods, for maintaining the canals that served the people, for ensuring the prosperity of all. Now you can feel the shift. The wealth is no longer the tool, it is the goal. The glitter of orichalcum has become more mesmerizing than the abstract concept of justice. You follow a laden cart as it moves silently along a track, emerging from the mine into a vast smelting and processing area. Here, the raw ore is refined into gleaming ingots. The heat is immense, but it's a controlled, contained heat. The foremen overseeing the work don't wear the simple robes you saw earlier. Their clothes are adorned with polished orichalcum clasps and rings. Their status is displayed not by their wisdom or age, but by the amount of this precious metal they wear on their bodies. It's a silent, universally understood language of power. A fun but somewhat nerdy detail that academics love to debate is the actual composition of orichalcum. Some suggest it was a natural alloy of copper and gold, like tumbaca from Central America. Others think it was a type of brass, an alloy of copper and zinc, which can have a reddish gold sheen. The name itself might even derive from the Greek words for mountain copper, but its true nature remains one of history's great, unsolved mysteries.
Here, in the glow of the forges, its composition doesn't matter. What matters is what it represents. It represents the ability to bend the world to your will, to build higher, shine brighter, and live more comfortably than anyone else. You see a young supervisor berating a worker for a small spill of molten metal, his anger disproportionate to the mistake. His concern isn't for wastefulness in a civic sense, but for the loss of personal profit, for a dent in the quarterly production quota. The entire system, once designed for the collective good, is slowly being repurposed for individual gain. The divine laws of Poseidon were simple: be just, be temperate, do not covet. But those laws feel very far away right now. They are whispers for a forgotten age, easily drowned out by the roar of the forges and the clinking of newly minted orichalcum coins. The people are still good, in a functional sense. The city still runs perfectly, but their collective soul is being sold, piece by piece, for the warm red glow of a metal dug from the earth. The Atlanteans are beginning to believe that their greatness comes not from their divine blood or their virtuous actions, but from the contents of their minds. They are mistaking the symbols of their power for the source of their power. It's a subtle but fatal miscalculation. As the ingots are stacked, ready to be shipped to the central island, you realize you're not just looking at metal, you're looking at the solidified form of their fading morality, beautiful, heavy, and cold.
From the industrial noise of the forges, you find your way toward the administrative center of this land ring. The air becomes quieter, filled only with the soft rustle of robes and the distant rhythmic clang of a water clock. You've arrived at a building that is neither a temple nor a palace, but something equally important, a hall of governance. This is where the descendants of the 10 kings, now acting as a council of magistrates, convene to interpret and apply the ancient laws of the land. The architecture is severe and imposing, built from stark black basalt, designed to convey gravity and permanence. You slip into the public gallery, a tiered gallery of stone benches, and look down upon the council floor. 10 magistrates sit in a semicircle, facing a central dais where citizens can bring their disputes. The original laws, as laid down by Poseidon and codified by the first kings, were said to be inscribed on a great pillar of auricacum in the central temple. They were simple, elegant, and focused on principles rather than specifics. Honor the gods, do not raise arms against your kinsmen, show mercy, and act with virtue. For generations, these principles were enough. Judges ruled based on the spirit of the law, not the letter. But what you are witnessing today is different. The case before them is trivial. 2 merchants are arguing over the ownership of a canal barge. It's not a simple case of theft. It's a dispute over a contract filled with convoluted clauses and ambiguous wording. One merchant's advocate, a man with a sharp, calculating face, is not arguing about what is right or just. He is dissecting the language of the contract, pointing out a loophole, a misplaced comma, a cleverly worded phrase that technically grants his client ownership, even though everyone in the room seems to understand this was not the original intent.
And this is the 4th crack, spreading through the very foundation of their society. It is the moment law ceases to be a tool for justice and becomes a game of intellectual cleverness. The magistrates listen intently. A few of the older ones look troubled, their brows furrowed. They remember a time when a simple handshake and a sworn word were enough. But the younger ones are leaning forward, intrigued. They are impressed by the advocate's shrewdness, his mastery of rhetoric. They see it as a display of superior intellect, a quality the Atlanteans have come to prize above all else. The debate goes on, a dry, passionless affair of semantics. You realize you're witnessing the birth of bureaucracy. To close the loophole that is being exploited today, a new law will have to be written, and that new law will be more specific, more detailed. It will inevitably have its own loopholes, which will require another, even more complex law to fix. The simple, elegant pillar of principles is being buried under a mountain of pedantic, reactive legislation. A curious little fact from our own history is the Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest deciphered legal texts. It's famous for its eye for an eye principle, but a huge portion of it is dedicated to incredibly specific commercial and contract law, rules about boat rentals, agricultural loans, and faulty construction. It shows that as societies become more complex and transactional, their laws inevitably follow suit, often losing their moral clarity in the process. Here in Atlantis, this process is accelerating. The change is driven by the burgeoning merchant class, whose wealth from the orichalcum trade has given them influence. They need contracts, regulations, and protections for their complex international dealings. The old laws of simple virtue are insufficient for their ambitions. They need laws that can be bent, interpreted, and used as weapons in commercial disputes. And the ruling class, increasingly detached from the lives of ordinary people and enamored with their own intellectual prowess, is happy to oblige.
The head magistrate, a man whose orichalcum signet ring is far larger than his father's would have been, finally renders a decision. He rules in favor of the clever merchant, acknowledging the validity of the loophole. He even offers a wry smile, a small nod of appreciation to the advocate for his skillful argument. A low murmur ripples through the gallery. It's not outrage, but something worse, a mix of cynicism and grudging respect. The lesson learned today by everyone watching is not that one should be just, but that one should be smart. Hire a better lawyer. Write a tighter contract. Find the loophole before your opponent does. The spiritual core of their legal system is being hollowed out, replaced by a complex, amoral machinery of words. Whether Plato intended this as a direct critique of the sophists in his own Athenian society, philosophers who were often accused of teaching rhetoric for a fee, prizing clever arguments over truth, is a topic of endless academic discussion. But the effect is clear. When the people of a nation begin to see their laws not as a shared shield for the weak, but as a sword for the clever, the social contract begins to dissolve. The city is still orderly, the canals still flow, but the invisible bonds of trust that hold it all together are beginning to fray, one carefully worded clause at a time.
Leaving the sterile atmosphere of the law courts, you feel a need for something more primal, more connected to the city's supposed origins. You make your way towards the largest structure on this particular land ring, the great open-air enclosure dedicated to the sacred bulls of Poseidon. The sun is low in the sky now, casting long, dramatic shadows. A cool breeze blows in from the sea, carrying with it the sounds of chanting and music. It seems a major ceremony is about to begin. According to the founding myths, the connection between the kings of Atlantis and their divine father was renewed through a very specific and rather strange ritual. Every 5 or 6 years, the 10 kings would gather in this enclosure. They were forbidden from using any metal tools or weapons. Armed only with clubs and nooses, they had to hunt and capture one of the sacred bulls that roamed freely within the sanctuary. It was a test of courage, skill, and cooperation. The captured bull was then sacrificed on the great orichalcum pillar, its blood poured over the sacred laws as the king swore an oath to rule justly and judge according to the ancient ways. It was a raw, visceral, and deeply meaningful ceremony that reinforced their humility before the gods and their duty to their people. You find a place among the crowds gathering on the raised stone tiers that surround the vast enclosure, but the atmosphere feels wrong. It's not one of solemn religious observation. It feels like the pre-show excitement at a major sporting event. Vendors are selling sweet wine in clay cups and honey cakes stamped with the image of a bull. People are laying bets, their voices loud and boisterous, arguing over which of the royal scions will be the first to land a noose. The sacred has become entertainment.
The ceremony begins. The gates to the inner sanctuary are opened, and 10 figures emerge. But these are not the 10 kings. They appear to be younger men, the sons and nephews of the ruling magistrates. They are athletic and confident, but their faces show a competitive fire, not a pious reverence. They carry wooden clubs and ropes, as tradition dictates, but their movements are flamboyant, designed to impress the cheering crowd. The bulls are then released into the main arena. They are magnificent creatures, powerful and sleek, but they seem slightly disoriented, their wildness dulled. What unfolds next is less a sacred hunt and more of a chaotic rodeo. The young royals show off, trying to outdo one another with risky maneuvers. One leaps onto a bull's back, waving to the crowd, only to be thrown unceremoniously into the dust, drawing laughter instead of gasps of concern. The solemnity of the hunt is gone, replaced by a theatrical performance of machismo. The focus is no longer on the collective goal of capturing a bull for the gods, but on individual glory. This is the fifth crack, the decay of religious ritual into hollow spectacle. The purpose of the ceremony, to humble the rulers and remind them of their sacred duty, has been completely inverted. It is now a platform for the elite to display their prowess and for the populace to be entertained. A little-known fact from Roman history is the evolution of the triumph, a parade celebrating a victorious general. Initially, a slave would stand behind the general in his chariot, holding a laurel wreath over his head and continuously whispering "Memento Morti," or "Remember, you are mortal." It was a sacred check on hubris. Over centuries, this element faded, and the triumph became a pure spectacle of power and ego, with the general as the star. The Atlanteans are experiencing a similar cultural shift. You watch as a bull is finally cornered and subdued, less through skill and more through sheer clumsy exhaustion. It's dragged toward a large ornate altar at one end of the enclosure. But there is no great pillar of orichalcum here. That, you recall, is on the central island, hidden from public view. This is a secondary, public-facing altar. The sacrifice is performed, but it feels perfunctory, a messy bit of business to be gotten over with before the feasting begins. The crowd cheers, not for the gods, but for the victors. The most sacred act of their civilization has been demoted to a halftime show. Historians who study the fall of civilizations often point to this phenomenon. When the rituals that encode a society's core values become empty performances, it's a sign that those values are no longer truly believed. The people are just going through the motions. They are performing their culture rather than living it. The debate continues whether this decay is a cause or a symptom of moral decline. Does the spectacle corrupt the belief, or does the loss of belief turn the sacred into spectacle? Here it feels like a vicious cycle. The diluted divine blood made them forget the meaning, and forgetting the meaning turned the ritual into a party. Now the party atmosphere ensures that the next generation will never learn the original meaning at all. They will grow up thinking that honoring Poseidon means winning a rodeo and having a feast. The connection to the divine, the very source of their old virtue, is being severed, not with a dramatic snap, but with loud music, cheering, and the sweet taste of honey cakes. As the celebration begins in earnest, you feel a profound sense of loss. They are celebrating the death of their own soul and calling it a festival. As the noise of the festival fades behind you, you wander into a different part of the city, a district that feels newer, more dynamic, and humming with a different kind of energy. This is the Mercantile Quarter, centered around the Grand Canal that connects the city to the open sea. The warehouses here are enormous, built from practical granite rather than decorative basalt. The air smells of foreign spices, damp rope, and the mineral tang of orichalcum being loaded onto ships. This is the engine room of the Atlantean economy, and you can feel the thrum of its power. You see a man standing on the docks, overseeing the loading of a large seafaring vessel. He is not dressed in the simple, elegant robes of the old aristocracy. He wears practical, tailored trousers and a tunic made from a rich, dark blue fabric you haven't seen before. His hands are calloused, his face weathered by sun and sea, but his eyes are sharp and commanding. He is giving orders to the dock workers with an air of absolute authority, and even a few of the uniformed city guards seem to defer to him. He is not a king, a priest, or a magistrate. He is a merchant prince, a member of a new class of power that is rapidly rising to prominence in Atlantis. Here, you are witnessing the sixth crack in the city's foundation. The subtle but seismic shift of power from the hereditary, landowning rulers to the new titans of commerce. For generations, power in Atlantis was static and clear. It flowed from the 10 kings, legitimized by their divine blood and their role as guardians of the law. Status was inherited, not earned. But the explosion of trade, fueled by the seemingly limitless supply of orichalcum and the city's perfect harbors, has changed the equation. Wealth, once a byproduct of a well-run state, is now a force capable of creating its own gravity. This merchant prince may not have a drop of Poseidon's blood in his veins, but he controls the flow of grain from Egypt, the timber from lands that would one day be Phoenicia, and the rare dyes from the distant west. He can create shortages or surpluses. He can fund public works, or he can withhold his resources, causing subtle economic tremors that can be felt all the way to the central island. His power is not theoretical or divine. It is tangible, material, and immediate. You watch as a young magistrate, a man from one of the old families you saw in the law courts, approaches the merchant. The magistrate's posture is stiff, his expression a mixture of condescension and reluctant respect. He has come to request a contribution for the construction of a new public gymnasium. The magistrate listens, a slight, unreadable smile on his face. He doesn't agree immediately. Instead, he speaks in a low voice, gesturing towards a new set of regulations being debated in the council, regulations that would place higher tariffs on his imported goods. The implication is clear. The donation for the gymnasium is contingent on the magistrate's vote regarding the tariffs. This is the new politics of Atlantis. It's no longer about interpreting the sacred laws on the orichalcum pillar. It's about backroom deals struck on a windy dockside. The old aristocracy, with their diluted bloodline and their abstract notions of virtue, are finding themselves increasingly outmaneuvered by these pragmatic, ruthless, and incredibly wealthy newcomers. A lesser-known detail of Venetian history provides a fascinating parallel. The city's ruling class, the patriciate, was officially a closed hereditary body. But in reality, the immense wealth of its merchant families, who controlled the spice trade, gave them enormous de facto power. They funded wars, influenced elections, and often held the blue-blooded but poorer nobles in their debt. Venice thrived on this tension, but Atlantis is beginning to buckle under it. The very definition of a good citizen is changing before your eyes. It used to be the man who was just, pious, and temperate. Now, it is the man who is successful, who gets things done, who contributes visibly to the city's prosperity, regardless of the methods used. The merchant prince is seen by many, especially the young and ambitious, as a hero. He is a man of action, a builder, a creator of wealth, while the old rulers are seen as stagnant custodians of a fading tradition. Whether Plato was subtly commenting on the rising power of the merchant class in his own city of Athens is, as always, a subject of scholarly debate. But the narrative he weaves is a timeless one. It's the story of what happens when a society's value system shifts from intangible ideals, honor, justice, to quantifiable metrics, wealth, influence. The merchant prince isn't evil. He is simply playing a new game, a game that the old rulers, bound by tradition and a sense of propriety, are ill-equipped to win. The magistrate eventually nods, a flicker of resentment in his eyes, and the deal is struck. The gymnasium will be built, the merchant's name will be inscribed on its cornerstone, and the tariffs will be quietly voted down. Power has not been seized in a violent coup. It has been bought,
smoothly and professionally on a Tuesday afternoon. As the merchant turns his attention back to his ship, you realize the divine blood of the kings is no match for the flowing river of gold, silver, and orichalcum that now truly rules Atlantis.
Following the invisible currents of this new money, you find yourself drawn toward a massive construction site near the heart of the city. The sounds of chisels and hammers, which were once rhythmic and purposeful in the mines, are here frenetic and competitive. Cranes of an ingenious design, powered by complex systems of counterweights and water pressure, lift enormous blocks of white, red, and black stone into the air. This is the physical manifestation of the merchant prince's influence, a new wave of construction fueled by private wealth rather than civic planning. You stand before what will one day be a grand villa, the future home of the very merchant you just saw on the docks. But this is no modest, low-lying dwelling like those of the old aristocracy. This is a monument. It towers over the neighboring buildings, its design a riot of competing styles. There are soaring columns that seem to serve no structural purpose, intricate friezes depicting the merchant's own ships rather than scenes from mythology, and a grand central dome plated not in humble silver or even gold, but in polished, fiery orichalcum, deliberately trying to outshine the distant temple of Poseidon itself. This is where the seventh crack appears, etched into the very skyline of the city. It is the rise of architecture driven not by function or faith, but by vanity. The original city, designed by a god, was a masterpiece of harmonious logical design. Every element had a purpose. The rings provided defense, the canals facilitated transport, the temples inspired reverence. But this new building has no such logic. Its purpose is to shout. It shouts, "Look at me! Look how wealthy I am! I am more important than my neighbors. My achievements are more worthy of celebration than those of the gods." You watch the architect, a young, ambitious man, arguing with the master stonemason. The architect is insisting on a precarious, cantilevered balcony that the stonemason, a grizzled veteran who learned his craft from his father, insists is unsafe. "It defies the stone's nature," the old man grumbles. The architect scoffs. "We are Atlanteans," he declares with a wave of his hand. "We make nature bend to our will." He is not just designing a house, he is making a philosophical statement, and it's a statement of pure hubris. This moment captures a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of societal decay, the co-opting of art and engineering for the purpose of ego. Think of the late Roman Empire, where emperors built ever larger and more extravagant baths and palaces, each trying to outdo the last, their scale often bearing no relation to the needs of the populace, but everything to do with personal legacy. It's a classic symptom of a culture that has begun to worship itself. Historians still debate whether the unique bull-leaping frescoes of the Minoan palace at Knossos were purely religious, or if they also served as a form of political propaganda for the ruling elite, a way of showcasing their daring and control over nature. Here in Atlantis, the line has clearly been crossed. The new buildings funded by the merchant class are transforming the visual landscape of the city. The once harmonious rings are becoming a chaotic jumble of competing monuments to private wealth. The shared visual language of the city, which for centuries reinforced the ideals of order and community, is being shattered. Now the message is one of individual competition. My villa is bigger than your villa. My dome is shinier than your dome.
You see a family, A father, mother, and child from the old aristocracy walk by the construction site. They look up at the towering edifice with undisguised disdain. Their disapproval is not just aesthetic, it's a deep, instinctual rejection of its vulgarity, its lack of proportion, its arrogant spirit. But then you see another group, younger Atlanteans, who look up at the same building with admiration, with envy. They see it as bold, innovative, and powerful. They see it as the future. In this simple architectural dispute, the entire moral schism of Atlantis is laid bare. It's the old world of collective harmony versus the new world of individual ambition. It's the spirit of Poseidon's humble divine plan versus the spirit of the merchant prince's self-aggrandizing ledger. The very stones of the city are now at war with each other. The house is not just a house, it is an act of rebellion against the city's founding principles. And as the workers, urged on by the ambitious architect, begin the dangerous work on the unsupported balcony, you get the distinct feeling that this new, arrogant style of building is creating a weakness in the city's physical structure, just as their pride is creating one in its moral structure. The cracks are no longer just metaphorical, they are being carved into the very rock.
Leaving the ostentatious construction site behind, you feel a pull to see the other side of this growing divide. If the inner rings are becoming a showcase for the newly rich, what is happening on the periphery? You make your way back outward, past the district of the old families, past the first great canal, and on to the outermost ring of land. This is the part of the city that connects to the wider island, to the farmlands and the countryside beyond. The air here is dustier, the roads less perfectly maintained. This is where the service economy of Atlantis lives. The buildings here are not grand villas or imposing halls of justice. They are simple, functional apartment blocks, packed tightly together. This is home to the stonemasons, the canal dredgers, the dock workers, the weavers, and the countless others whose labor makes the opulent lifestyle of the inner rings possible. In the early days of Atlantis, the city's structure was meant to be harmonious, with all citizens valued for their contribution. But now you see the physical and social distance has created a profound psychological one. You stop in a small, crowded marketplace. The goods here are not exotic spices or fine fabrics, but simple vegetables, coarse bread, and cheap clay pottery. The people's faces are weary. Their clothes are patched. They are still Atlanteans. They carry themselves with a certain innate dignity, but the effortless grace you saw in the inner rings has been replaced by a stolid resilience. They are the foundation upon which the gleaming pyramid of Atlantean society is built, and they are beginning to feel the weight.
You overhear a conversation between two women washing clothes at a public fountain. They speak of the rising price of grain, a direct consequence of the merchant prince's manipulation of the import market to increase his profits. They talk about their sons, who have been conscripted for labor on the new vanity projects in the city, working longer hours for the same pay because the glory of Atlantis demands it. But there is no glory in their voices, only a deep-seated exhaustion. This is the eighth crack, a subtle but spreading fracture of neglect and apathy, the growing coldness between the city's heart and its extremities. The elite, obsessed with their wealth, their legal games, and their architectural rivalries, have started to see the peoples of this outer ring not as fellow citizens, but as a resource, a pool of labor, a line item on a budget. This is a classic symptom of a society in decline. Historians often point to the bread and circuses of Rome, where the ruling class placated the urban poor with free food and violent spectacles, not out of genuine care, but as a tool of social control to prevent riots, while ignoring the systemic issues causing their poverty.
The Roman elite had lost any real connection to the struggles of the plebeian class. Here in Atlantis, they haven't even bothered with the circuses yet. There is only a quiet, simmering resentment. You see a tax collector, an official from an inner ring, making his rounds. He is clean, well-dressed, and carries a ledger bound in fine leather. The people he interacts with are deferential, but their eyes are cold. They hand over their share of currency, a share that seems to grow larger each year to fund projects they will never benefit from. The merchant's villa, the new gymnasium for the elite, the ornamental gardens where they are not welcome. There is no sense of shared purpose, of contributing to a common good. There is only the feeling of being squeezed.
A strange, almost forgotten detail from Plato's account is his mention of elephants on the island of Atlantis. He states there was an abundance of them, which has fascinated and puzzled historians for ages. Were there really elephants on this mythical Atlantic island? Or was this a detail borrowed from Africa or Asia to emphasize the island's exotic richness? The academic debate is ongoing, but standing here in this forgotten outer ring, the idea of elephants feels strangely fitting. The elite in the center of the city are like maharajas, riding high on these immense, powerful beasts, completely oblivious to the ground being trampled beneath them. You see a child trying to sail a toy boat in a muddy puddle. The boat is a clumsy thing, carved from a piece of driftwood. It's a pale imitation of the sleek, self-propelled ships that glide through the Grand Canals. The child watches it bob for a moment, then, with a flicker of frustration, pushes it under the water. It's a small, childish act, but it feels symbolic. The dream of Atlantis, the idea that every citizen is part of a perfect, harmonious whole, is sinking. For the people of the outer ring, the city is no longer a promise. It is a burden, and a society that ceases to care for its foundations is a society that is preparing itself to collapse.
The growing discontent you've witnessed in the outer ring feels like a raw, uncomfortable truth. It makes you wonder, who is in charge of remembering the truth in this city? Every great civilization has its storytellers, its keepers of the official narrative, and so, you make your way back towards the city's heart, to the central island itself. After crossing the final, most impressive bridge, you stand before a structure that is second only to the Temple of Poseidon in its grandeur, the Great Library, or the Hall of Records. This building is not a place of worship or commerce, but of memory. It is here that the entire history of Atlantis, from the divine age of the gods to the latest shipping manifests, is supposedly chronicled. The building is a marvel of serene, ancient architecture, its walls made of pale white marble that seems to absorb the sunlight. The air inside is cool and smells of papyrus, leather, and the faint, dry scent of dust. There are no loud voices here, only the whisper of turning pages and the soft scuff of sandals on the polished floor. You wander through vast halls lined with towering shelves. Scribes, all of them members of a dedicated, almost priestly caste, sit at long tables, painstakingly copying older, crumbling scrolls onto fresh ones. Their work is a picture of devotion and scholarly calm. They are the guardians of the past, ensuring that the knowledge of their ancestors is not lost to time. Or so it seems. You approach a senior scribe, an old man with eyes magnified by thick, polished crystal lenses. He is reviewing a newly copied section of the Royal Annals, the official history of the 10 Kings. You watch over his shoulder. The passage he is examining describes the reign of a king from several centuries ago. The original, faded scroll beside him tells a complex story. It speaks of a great famine, of difficult decisions, of a king who made a controversial treaty with a mainland tribe, a treaty that saved his people, but was seen by some as a sign of weakness. It's a nuanced, human story of leadership in a time of crisis. But the new copy the scribe is proofreading is different. The famine is mentioned only in passing as a minor challenge. The controversial treaty is reframed as a masterful act of diplomacy, in which the barbarian tribe was graciously permitted to serve the Atlantean kingdom. The king's difficult human struggle has been polished into a flawless, heroic narrative. The scribe reads the new version, nods slowly in satisfaction, and applies his official seal. The nuanced truth has been officially erased, replaced by a simplified, more flattering lie. This is the 9th crack, and it is perhaps the most insidious of all. It is the deliberate, systemic sanitization of history. The very institution designed to preserve the truth is now engaged in the business of manufacturing propaganda. The rulers of Atlantis, insecure in their diluted divinity and their new, wealth-driven status, can no longer tolerate a history that portrays their ancestors as fallible. They need a past that is as perfect and gleaming as their orichalcum domes, a past that justifies their present arrogance. This practice is hardly unique to Atlantis. A fascinating, if troubling, aspect of history is the way powerful regimes have always sought to control the historical record. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs like Hatshepsut had their names and images systematically chiseled off monuments by their successors to erase their reigns from memory. The Romans practiced damnatio memoriae, officially condemning disgraced emperors and removing their names from public records. Historians still debate the extent of these practices and how much of what we know about the ancient world is actually the result of a successful, millennia-old PR campaign. Here, in the quiet, dusty halls of the Great Library, the process is subtle, less about erasure and more about refinement. It's presented as a noble task, clarifying the historical record, removing ambiguities, presenting the great story of Atlantis in its most inspiring form for future generations. But the result is a slow lobotomy performed on the collective consciousness of the city. A people who were fed a steady diet of flawless ancestors and inevitable triumphs will forget how to learn from failure. They will forget the importance of humility, compromise, and struggle. They will come to believe that they are inherently superior and infallible because their own official history tells them so. You watch as a young apprentice scribe diligently copies another text. He is working on an account of the first sacred bull hunt. He has never seen the chaotic, showy spectacle you witnessed. He only knows the words on the scroll in front of him, which describe an act of profound, silent reverence. He is learning a version of his culture that no longer exists in reality. The gap between the official story and the lived experience of the city is widening into a chasm. The Great Library, once a bastion of knowledge, has become a dream factory. It manufactures a beautiful, heroic past to mask an increasingly hollow and corrupt present. And when a civilization loses the ability to look at its own past with honesty, it loses the compass it needs to navigate the future. Your journey through the city's decaying institutions has so far been one of quiet observation. But now you feel drawn to a place of noise and action, a place that is supposed to embody the physical peak of Atlantean culture, the Grand Arena. This isn't the sacred enclosure of the bulls, but a secular stadium, a place for games and public competitions. In the early days, these games were a celebration of human potential. They were about athletic prowess, skill, and the honorable pursuit of excellence. Running, wrestling, and tests of engineering skill were the main events, all performed in a spirit of friendly civic competition. You arrive to find the stadium packed. The energy is electric, far more intense than the feigned piety at the bull ceremony.
The crowd is a true cross-section of Atlantis, from the bejeweled merchants in the front rows to the dusty laborers in the highest tiers. They are all here for the main event, a competition that has become wildly popular in recent years, a stylized form of combat. This isn't a fight to the death, not yet, but it's far more brutal than the wrestling matches of old. You watch as two contestants enter the sandy arena floor. They are athletic marvels, their bodies honed to perfection, but they are not competing as citizens of Atlantis. They are competing as representatives of wealthy patrons. One wears the deep blue of the merchant prince you saw at the docks, the other the crimson of a rival trading house. The crowd doesn't cheer for the men themselves, but for the factions they represent. The spirit of civic unity has been supplanted by the thrill of proxy warfare between the rich and powerful.
This is the 10th crack, a deep fissure in the city's recreational soul, the perversion of honorable competition into a vehicle for gambling and vicarious violence. The focus has shifted entirely from the skill of the athletes to the outcome of the match. You can see it all around you. People are not watching the intricate footwork or the clever defensive maneuvers. They are screaming, their faces contorted, clutching betting slips made of cheap papyrus. Orichalcum coins are changing hands with every blow landed. The sport itself is secondary. The real game is happening in the stands. The fight begins. It is fast and technical, but there's a new edge to it, a performative cruelty. A fighter will gain an advantage, and then, instead of ending the match cleanly, will posture for the crowd, taunting his opponent to elicit a bigger cheer. The roar of the crowd is intoxicating, a wave of raw, unified emotion. It's a powerful feeling, and the rulers of the city have clearly taken notice. This is a far more effective way to keep the populace distracted and entertained than tales of their ancestors' virtue. A particularly telling historical parallel is the evolution of gladiatorial combat in Rome. While often depicted as a purely bloodthirsty spectacle, its origins may have been in solemn funerary rites. The Etruscans and later the early Romans may have held these combats to honor the dead. But over time, driven by political ambition and the need to curry public favor, they morphed into the massive, brutal games of the Colosseum. The original meaning was lost entirely, replaced by a highly addictive, state-sponsored spectacle of death. The question of whether the games were a reflection of Roman society's inherent violence or a tool that actively made it more callous is one historians still grapple with. Here in the Atlantean arena, you see that process in its early stages. The violence is still stylized, the defeat signaled by submission, not death. But the seed has been planted. The crowd is being conditioned to enjoy the spectacle of another's pain, to find catharsis in a controlled explosion of brutality. They are learning to sublimate their growing frustrations with the price of grain, with the arrogance of the elite, with the hollowness of their rituals, into the simple, satisfying roar for a favorite champion. The match ends. The man in the merchant prince's blue is victorious. The crowd erupts, a shower of flowers and coins raining down on the victor. His patron, the merchant himself, stands and bows, accepting the applause as if he had won the victory himself. The athlete is merely his instrument. The defeated opponent is helped from the arena, his shame a public spectacle. There is no honor in his defeat, only the humiliation of having disappointed his backer and the thousands who bet against him. The ancient ideal of arete, the Greek concept of excellence and virtue combined, is dead. It has been replaced by a lust for victory at any cost and a hunger for visceral stimulation. The games are no longer a mirror reflecting the best of Atlantean society. They are a drug, dulling its senses to the deeper sickness that has taken hold.
As the crowd begins to disperse, buzzing with talk of the next match and the latest odds, you realize that a city that finds its greatest sense of unity and passion in a spectacle of simulated violence is a city that is learning to love the very things that will eventually destroy it.
Leaving the feverish excitement of the arena, you seek out the quieter, more cosmopolitan parts of the city near the main seaport. This is the gateway to the world, where ships from every known corner of the globe arrive, bringing not just goods, but people and ideas. In its golden age, Atlantis was known for its openness and curiosity. The wisdom of its rulers was so great, the story goes, that they could engage with any culture, learn from it, and trade with it, all without losing their own sense of identity. The city was a melting pot, confident in its own virtue. You now find yourself in a bustling square near the docks, a place specifically designated for foreign traders. The air is a cacophony of different languages and smells. You see a group of swarthy, bearded merchants from the lands that would become the Levant, haggling over the price of cedar wood. You see dark-skinned sailors from the south, perhaps Nubia, displaying intricate ivory carvings. You even see a few fair-haired, ruddy-faced traders from the cold northern islands, wrapped in heavy furs despite the mild climate. It's a vibrant, chaotic, and beautiful scene of human connection. But the attitude of the Atlanteans has changed. You observe a city official, clad in the now familiar uniform of a minor magistrate, dealing with a petitioner, a dignified man from a city-state that might one day be called Athens. The Athenian is making a perfectly reasonable request regarding docking fees, but the Atlantean official isn't listening. His posture is one of bored, unassailable superiority. He speaks slowly, as if to a child, his words dripping with condescension. He refers to the Athenian not by his name or city, but simply as a foreigner, his tone making the word sound like an insult. This is the 11th crack, and it's a change in how Atlantis sees the rest of the world. It is the birth of xenophobia, the quiet but potent belief that anyone not born within the sacred rings of the city is inherently inferior. The early Atlanteans' confidence has curdled into arrogance. Their self-awareness has morphed into self-obsession. They no longer see outsiders as people to learn from, but as barbarians to be exploited, managed, or, at best, tolerated. The shift is subtle but pervasive. You see it in the way Atlantean children stare at the foreign sailors, a mixture of fascination and disdain in their eyes, a look they have clearly learned from their parents. You hear it in the jokes and slang used by the dock workers, derogatory terms for people of different ethnicities. The city that once had the wisdom to engage with the world is now building invisible walls around itself, walls of prejudice that are far more effective than the rings of water. This is a recurring theme in the histories of great empires. The Roman concept of barbarian is a prime example. Initially, it simply meant a non-Roman, a speaker of a foreign tongue. Over time, especially as the empire grew more decadent and insecure, the word became loaded with connotations of savagery, ignorance, and inferiority. It was a psychological tool that allowed the Romans to justify their conquests and maintain a sense of superiority even as their own society began to crumble from within. Whether Plato was using Atlantis to warn his fellow Greeks about the dangers of their own growing sense of Hellenic superiority over the barbarian Persians is a question that fuels much scholarly discussion. Here, the practical effect of this new arrogance is a breakdown of genuine communication. The Athenian petitioner, a proud man from a proud city, eventually gives up, his face a mask of weary frustration. He will go back to his ship not with a deal, but with a story of Atlantean haughtiness. A small seed of resentment has been planted. Multiply this incident by 1,000, and you have the slow curdling of international relations. Atlantis is making enemies, not through acts of war, but through 1,000 tiny acts of disrespect. You notice a particularly strange detail.
Some of the more zealous Atlanteans have started performing purification rituals after dealing with foreigners, washing their hands in bowls of sanctified water as if to cleanse themselves of a contaminant. It's a practice that is both bizarre and deeply insulting, turning everyday interaction into a matter of spiritual hygiene. It's a clear sign that their worldview has become dangerously binary. There is the pure, enlightened world of Atlantis, and then there is everyone else. This growing contempt for the outside world is a symptom of a deep-seated insecurity. A truly confident culture is open and absorbent. A culture that is beginning to doubt its own greatness becomes defensive, brittle, and exclusionary. The Atlanteans are so busy admiring their own reflection in the still waters of their canals that they have forgotten that the great ocean beyond holds both treasures and dangers. By treating all outsiders as inferiors, they are blinding themselves to potential allies and deafening themselves to the warnings that a friendly neighbor might have offered. They are alone, at the center of the world, and for the first time, it feels less like a position of power and more like one of profound and dangerous isolation.
Your path takes you back, inevitably, to the Hall of Governance. The quiet cynicism you witnessed there earlier has had time to fester, and you're curious to see how it has evolved. The building seems busier now, filled with more clerks, more petitioners, and more of a new, unsettling profession. Professional advocates or lawyers whose entire business is the navigation of the increasingly dense thicket of laws. You enter the same public gallery, and the scene below is both familiar and alarmingly different. The 10 magistrates are still there, but they look less like judges and more like exhausted referees in a game whose rules are constantly changing. The case before them today does not involve a simple barge or a commercial contract. It involves the diversion of a small stream in the countryside on the main island beyond the city rings. A wealthy landowner, a man connected to the merchant factions, has dammed a stream to create a private ornamental lake for his new estate. This act, however, has cut off the water supply for a half-dozen small family-run farms downstream. The farmers, looking deeply uncomfortable in the imposing hall, are representing themselves. Their argument is simple, based on the ancient customs of the land. The water is a gift from the gods, it belongs to everyone, it must be shared. They speak of their grandfathers and their grandfathers' grandfathers, who all used the stream. Their appeal is to tradition, to fairness, to the spirit of the original laws. Then, the landowner's advocate steps forward. He is the same sharp-faced man you saw before, but his reputation and his fee have clearly grown. He is a master of the new legal arts. He does not argue about fairness or tradition. He unrolls a series of complex scrolls, property deeds, zoning variances, water rights applications, all officially stamped and sealed. He speaks for an hour, his voice a calm, hypnotic drone. He cites a dozen different statutes, cross-references obscure regulations about land improvement, and points to a precedent set in a completely unrelated case about mining runoff. He builds a fortress of legal jargon around his client, a fortress so dense and impenetrable that the farmer's simple plea for justice seems to vanish without a trace. This is the 12th crack, and it's the weaponization of complexity. The law is no longer a shield for the weak. It has become a club for the powerful. The wealthy landowner is not winning because he is right, but because he can afford a better architect of legal arguments. Justice itself has been priced out of the market. The magistrates listen, and you can see the conflict on their faces. The older ones know, in their hearts, that the farmers are right, but they are trapped. The advocate has followed every letter of the new laws. To rule against him would be to admit that their entire, carefully constructed legal edifice
is a sham, that it can produce outcomes that are fundamentally unjust. This phenomenon is one of the most subtle and debilitating diseases that can afflict a complex society. A fascinating, if dry, area of historical study is the analysis of late Byzantine legal codes. As the empire became more bureaucratic and sclerotic, its laws became almost incomprehensibly complex, accessible only to a specialized class of legal scholars. This created a system where well-connected insiders could always find a legal justification for their actions, while ordinary citizens were lost in a maze of paperwork, unable to defend their basic rights. It's a quiet form of oppression, one that wears the mask of due process.
The advocate finishes his presentation with a flourish. He has successfully proven that, according to Section 4, subsection C of the Agricultural Land Use Act of the Third Dynasty, his client's ornamental lake is not a diversion, but a hydrological improvement. The words mean nothing in the real world. The farmer's fields are still turning to dust, but in this hall, words are all that matter. The farmers stand defeated, not by a superior argument, but by a superior vocabulary. The chief magistrate, looking weary, rules in favor of the landowner. He does so with regret, he says, and suggests the council may need to review the relevant statutes at a future date. But everyone knows this is an empty gesture. The precedent has been set. The message sent out to every corner of Atlantis is clear. The law will protect the person who can best manipulate the law. The old customs are meaningless. The spirit of the law is dead. Only the letter remains, and the letter can be twisted into any shape you can afford. The farmers are led out of the hall, their faces a mixture of confusion and betrayal. They did not lose a case. They lost their faith in the very idea of justice. The social contract, the implicit promise that the state will protect its citizens, has been declared null and void in a courtroom. As the lawyers pack up their scrolls, you feel a chill that has nothing to do with the cool marble of the hall. It is the chill of a society whose operating system has been corrupted. The machine of state is still running, but it is now processing injustice with terrifying efficiency.
The feeling of cold, procedural injustice you witnessed in the Hall of Governance lingers as you make your way to the very heart of Atlantis, the central island. This is the sanctum sanctorum, the most sacred and powerful place in the entire kingdom. And at its absolute center stands the destination of your long walk, the great Temple of Poseidon. This, according to Plato, was a site of unparalleled wonder. Its exterior was coated entirely in silver, except for the pinnacles on the roof, which were covered in pure gold. The scale was immense, a landmark visible from miles out at sea. It was designed to inspire awe, humility, and devotion to the god who founded their civilization. You pass through colossal gates of polished bronze and enter the temple precinct. The sheer opulence is breathtaking. The air is thick with the scent of burning incense and old sacred cedar. But as you draw closer to the main temple building, you notice that the activity around it is not what you'd expect. Instead of pilgrims and priests engaged in quiet prayer, you see lines of people at stalls set up along the temple's outer walls. These are not stalls selling religious trinkets. They are currency exchange booths. You see merchants arguing with men in priestly robes over interest rates. You see a ship captain negotiating a loan using his vessel's future cargo as collateral, with the transaction being recorded by a temple scribe. You see landowners paying their state taxes, not to a government office, but directly to the temple treasury. the house of the god of the seas has become the central bank of the city.
This is the 13th crack, a profound desecration that is all the more shocking for how normal everyone seems to find it. The spiritual heart of Atlantis has been converted into its financial headquarters. The immense wealth of the temple, accumulated through centuries of tithes and offerings given in good faith, is no longer being used to honor the gods or serve the poor. It is being used as capital, a tool to generate more wealth through lending and investment. You enter the temple itself. The inner sanctum is supposed to house the most sacred object in Atlantis, the great pillar of orichalcum on which the original laws were inscribed. And it is there, in the center of the vast, echoing hall. It still gleams with its fiery internal light, but it is no longer the focal point of the room. The space around it is cluttered with tables piled high with ledgers, scales for weighing precious metals, and safes secured with complex locks. Priests who should be contemplating theology are instead hunched over these tables, their faces illuminated by the glow of the sacred pillar as they calculate profit margins. A striking parallel exists in the history of the Knights Templar, originally a poor monastic order dedicated to protecting pilgrims. They pioneered early forms of banking, creating a network of preceptories across Europe where nobles could deposit wealth and receive letters of credit. They became astonishingly wealthy and powerful, acting as the bankers for kings and popes. This financial activity, however, led to accusations of greed and heresy, contributing to their brutal suppression in the 14th century. The question of whether their banking activities were a corruption of their sacred mission or a practical necessity of their organization is still debated by historians.
Here in Poseidon's temple, the line has clearly been crossed. The priests have convinced themselves and the populace that this is all part of their sacred duty. By managing the city's wealth, they are ensuring its stability and prosperity, which, in turn, is a way of honoring the god who gifted them this island. It's a convenient, self-serving rationalization. They have merged the worship of God and mammon so completely that they can no longer tell the two apart. The language of finance has infected the language of faith. You overhear a high priest blessing a merchant's new enterprise, praying not for his soul, but for a bountiful return on investment. The very atmosphere of the place is wrong. The awe it was meant to inspire is gone, replaced by the tense, anxious energy of a trading floor. The sacred pillar, with its simple, ancient laws about virtue and moderation, stands as a silent, ironic rebuke to everything happening around it. It preaches humility, while the room buzzes with avarice. It speaks of justice, while the priests calculate compound interest. You watch a poor farmer from the outer rings approach one of the priestly bankers. He needs a small loan to buy new seeds after the stream was diverted by the wealthy landowner. The priest looks at him with cold, assessing eyes, asks for collateral the man does not have, and dismisses him with a wave of the hand. The temple, once the ultimate refuge for all citizens, now only serves those who can contribute to its balance sheet. It has completely forgotten its purpose. It is no longer a house of prayer. It is a predator hiding in a holy place. This is perhaps the most profound betrayal of all. When a society's highest spiritual institution becomes its most ruthless financial one, its moral compass is not just broken, it has been melted down and minted into coin.
Leaving the corrupted sanctity of the temple, you find yourself wandering through the most exclusive residential area of the central island. This is where the highest echelon of Atlantean society now lives. Not the old land-owning aristocracy with their fading traditions, but the new nexus of power, the senior magistrates, the wealthiest merchant princes, and the high priests who double as bankers. Their villas are even more opulent than the ones you saw under construction, surrounded by lush, manicured gardens where fountains spray scented water into the air. It is late afternoon, and the children of these powerful families are at play in the gardens. But their games are a disturbing reflection of their parents' world. You don't see them chasing balls or playing tag. You see a group of boys playing counsel, sitting in a circle and mimicking the convoluted legal arguments and cynical deal-making they have overheard at their father's dinner tables. One boy, playing the part of a merchant, offers another, playing a magistrate, a polished seashell in exchange for a favorable ruling in their imaginary game. Nearby, a group of girls are playing court. They adorn themselves with flowers and jewelry, not to look beautiful, but to establish a pecking order. They engage in whispered gossip and form shifting alliances, excluding one girl from their circle for some minor imagined infraction of their social code. Their play is a chillingly accurate rehearsal for a life of social climbing and status anxiety. They are not learning to be friends. They are learning to be competitors.
Here you witness the 14th crack, and it is a hairline fractured that runs through the very next generation. It is the failure of the elite to pass on any sense of virtue, duty, or empathy to their own children. These children are being raised in an environment of unimaginable wealth and privilege, completely insulated from the struggles of the ordinary people who make their lifestyle possible. They have never known want, they have never known failure, and they have never been taught the value of humility. Their education, you learn by listening to a tutor instructing his young charge, is focused entirely on the tools of power. They learn rhetoric not to seek truth, but to win arguments. They learn mathematics, not for the beauty of numbers, but for calculating profit and loss. They learn history, but it is the sanitized, heroic version from the Great Library, a version that teaches them they are the inevitable inheritors of a flawless legacy. The concept of noblesse oblige, the unwritten obligation of people from a noble background to act honorably and generously to others, is entirely absent. A poignant, small-scale parallel can be found in the letters of many wealthy Roman aristocrats during the late Empire. They would write at length about their children's education in Greek literature and philosophy, yet lament their obsession with chariot races, extravagant parties, and the brutal politics of imperial court life. The parents preserved the forms of a classical education, but failed to impart its ethical substance. The children learned the words of Seneca, but lived the lives of Caligula. Whether Plato was critiquing the spoiled youth of Athens' upper class, like his own disgraced student Alcibiades, is a perennial topic of debate.
Here, the consequences are stark. You see a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, casually order a household servant to perform a pointless and demeaning task, simply to demonstrate his authority. There is no malice in his voice, but something far more chilling, a complete lack of awareness that the servant is a human being with feelings and dignity. The servant is merely an object, a tool for his convenience. This is the worldview being nurtured in these gilded cages. The parents, when you see them, are either too busy with their own power games to notice, or they see this behavior and approve, viewing it as a sign of a natural-born leader. They are so preoccupied with securing their family's wealth and status that they have neglected to cultivate their children's souls. They are raising a generation of brilliant, educated, and completely amoral sociopaths. These are the children who will one day rule Atlantis. They will inherit the levers of power in the law courts, the trading houses, and the temple bank. But they will have none of the lingering residual guilt or memory of the old virtues that still occasionally trouble their parents. Their arrogance will be purer, their greed more refined, their contempt for the lower classes more absolute. They are the salt that has lost its savor, the divine blood so diluted it has become poison. As you watch them play their cold, sophisticated games under the setting sun, you realize you are looking at the city's doom in miniature. The Great Flood, when it comes, will not be the cause of Atlantis' fall. It will merely be the punctuation mark at the end of a long, slow sentence of moral decay, a sentence that was written, in part, in the nurseries and gardens of its most privileged children.
Your observations have so far focused on the decay of institutions and morals. But Atlantis was not just a society. It was a technological marvel. Driven by curiosity and their immense resources, you now turn your attention to the workshops of the city's famed inventors and engineers, located in a specialized quarter on the central island, not far from the clamor of the Temple Bank. In the past, this was a place of wonder, where minds dedicated to the public good developed the advanced hydraulics for the canals, the clean energy of the geothermal springs, and the architectural principles that made their earthquake-resistant buildings possible. You step into the largest of these workshops. It is a vast open space, filled with strange contraptions of bronze, crystal, and orichalcum. The air hums with a low-level energy you can't quite identify. But the projects currently underway are not focused on civic infrastructure or the betterment of society. You see engineers huddled around what looks like a sophisticated listening device. One of them explains it to a wealthy merchant patron. By placing crystal resonators at key points in the city's water pipes, they can amplify conversations taking place in any home connected to the system. It's being pitched as a civic security tool, a way to listen for sedition or criminal conspiracies. But the merchant's greedy smile tells you he's thinking of its applications for corporate espionage. In another corner, artisans are crafting intricate, beautiful automatons. These are not the simple, functional robots you might imagine, but lifelike birds with jeweled eyes that can sing complex melodies, and graceful, human-like figures that can serve wine at a banquet. They are marvels of engineering, but they are utterly frivolous. They are toys for the ultra-rich, designed to dazzle guests at parties and display the owner's immense wealth. They serve no purpose other than to be symbols of conspicuous consumption.
This is the 15th crack, a subtle but profound corruption in the city's very spirit of innovation. Technology, once a tool for liberation and progress, is being repurposed for control and hedonism. The brightest minds of Atlantis are no longer asking, what can we build to help everyone? They are being commissioned to answer the questions, what can you build to give me an advantage over my rivals? And what can you build to amuse me? The shift is palpable. The joy of pure discovery has been replaced by the pressure of client demands. The inventors are no longer free to pursue knowledge for its own sake. They are locked in a gilded cage of patronage, their genius tethered to the whims of the powerful. This is a story that has played out time and again in human history. The brilliant engineering of the Renaissance, which could have been used to improve sanitation or agriculture, was often poured into creating elaborate war machines for feuding city-states, or designing spectacular, but pointless, automata for the gardens of dukes. The question of whether technology drives social change or is merely a reflection of a society's existing values is one that philosophers and historians continue to debate endlessly. Here, the answer seems clear. The values of the new Atlantean elite are reshaping the trajectory of their science. You see a prototype for what appears to be a personal transportation device, a small hovering platform that levitates a few inches off the ground. It is slow, inefficient, and drains an enormous amount of energy from the city's central power grid. Its only function is to save a wealthy person the indignity of walking. It is the ultimate expression of sloth and arrogance, a technological solution to a problem that doesn't exist, created solely for the sake of status.
Meanwhile, in the outer rings, the farmers' irrigation systems are failing and the weavers' looms are old and inefficient. The genius of the Atlantean engineers is not being applied to these real-world problems. It is being hoarded in the center, used to create a bubble of effortless, decadent luxury for the few. The very tools that could be used to heal the growing divisions in their society are instead being used to widen the gulf between the classes. You watch as the merchant who commissioned the listening device takes delivery of the prototype. He handles it with a disturbing reverence, his eyes gleaming with the possibilities. He now has the power to hear the secrets of his enemies, his partners, even the magistrates he bribes. The potential for blackmail and manipulation is immense. Technology has not made him a better person. It has given him a more powerful way to express his worst impulses. The workshop, once a place of light and progress, now feels like a place of shadows. The creative, life-affirming spirit of invention has been twisted into something sterile and self-serving. The people of Atlantis are not just losing their moral compass, they are building the technological instruments of their own oppression, one beautiful, useless, and dangerous invention at a time. The same ingenuity that raised their city from the sea is now being used to design the architecture of its fall.
The inward-looking decay of Atlantis, its corrupt laws, its hollowed-out religion, its trivial technologies, has reached a saturation point. The city is like a pressure cooker, and the arrogant, entitled generation you saw in the gardens is now coming into power. They are bored, ambitious, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. A civilization in this state often looks for an outlet, a grand project to galvanize its people and project its power outward. It needs a target. You find yourself back on the central island, but this time, you are guided to a place few ever see, a soundproof chamber deep within the city's military headquarters. This is not the domain of the law courts or the temple. This is the realm of the strategos, the supreme military commander and his council of generals. The room is stark and functional. In the center is a massive table on which is laid out not a map of Atlantis, but a map of the entire known world, or what the Atlanteans consider to be the known world. The strategos, a man from a new generation of military leaders, is pointing to a spot on the map. It is a cluster of cities on the mainland, a place noted for its thinkers, its stubborn independence, and its burgeoning democracy. He is pointing to prehistoric Athens. For centuries, the relationship between Atlantis and Athens had been one of respectful, if distant trade. The Atlanteans saw the Athenians as clever but primitive, a harmless neighbor. But the new generation sees them differently. They see them as a rival, an ideological threat, a people who have found a different path to greatness, one based not on divine lineage and absolute order, but on citizen assemblies and philosophical debate.
This is the 16th crack, and it is the moment the city's internal corruption metastasizes into external aggression. It is the beginning of the first, truly unjust military campaign. The strategos is not arguing for a defensive war. He's laying out a plan for a preemptive conquest. He's reasoning, delivered in a sharp, confident tone, is a chilling summary of everything that has gone wrong with the Atlantean soul. He speaks of Athens as a source of destabilizing ideas that could infect the lower classes of Atlantis. He frames the conquest not as an act of aggression, but as a civilizing mission, a duty to bring the order and prosperity of Atlantis to a lesser people. He speaks of the vast resources and slave labor that could be extracted from the conquered territories, funds that could fuel even grander construction projects and more luxurious lifestyles back home. It is a cocktail of paranoia, paternalism, and naked greed, all cloaked in the language of destiny. The older generals on the council look uneasy. They were trained in the old way, to defend the rings of Atlantis, not to project power across the sea. They raise logistical concerns, question the necessity of the campaign. But the younger officers, products of the new, arrogant education system, are enthusiastic. They see the war as an opportunity for glory, a chance to prove themselves worthy of the heroic ancestors they've read about in the sanitized histories.
This transition from a defensive to an imperialistic military posture is a well-trodden path in history. The Roman Republic's expansion, for instance, began as a series of defensive wars against its immediate neighbors. But as its power and wealth grew, its wars became increasingly preemptive and predatory, driven by the ambitions of generals and the economic interests of the elite. The line between defending the state and feeding its ever-growing appetite for resources and glory blurred and then vanished. Whether Plato was directly alluding to the Peloponnesian War, the disastrous generation-long conflict between Athens and Sparta, is a favorite topic of historical debate. He saw firsthand how imperial ambition could corrupt a society from within and lead to its ruin. In this secret chamber, you are witnessing the birth of that same fatal ambition. The decision is made. The shipyards will begin constructing a new class of warship. The forges will churn out weapons instead of decorative metalwork. The young men of the outer rings will be conscripted, their lives spent not in service to their community, but in service to the vanity of their rulers. The justification for the war is a lie, but it is a lie they are beginning to believe themselves. They have told themselves they are the greatest civilization on earth for so long that they now feel they have the right, even the obligation, to impose their greatness on others. The moral decay is now complete. A society that began with the simple divine law to not raise arms against your kinsman has twisted its logic to a point where it is preparing to conquer a peaceful neighbor for the sake of its own ego. As the meeting adjourns, a young officer unrolls a new banner, the proposed standard for the invasion fleet. It shows a stylized map of Atlantis, but with golden rays of light emanating from it, shining out over a darkened, featureless world. It is a perfect piece of propaganda, depicting Atlantis not as a nation among nations, but as a sun, the center of the universe. The city's pride has finally curdled into a messianic delusion, and that delusion is about to be unleashed upon the world. The first warships of Atlantis will not be carrying explorers or merchants. They will be carrying an idea, the idea that because they are powerful, they are right.
The decision to prepare for war has been made in secret, but the preparations themselves are impossible to hide. The shipyards hum with a new, frantic energy. The forges glow day and night, casting an ominous red light against the clouds. The young men from the outer rings are drilled in the new arenas, their mock battles growing increasingly fierce. A martial spirit, aggressive and intolerant, begins to seep into the very air of the city.
And with it comes a new impatience for any voice that counsels caution or questions the new direction of the state. Your journey now takes you to a place that has been quiet for most of this story, a place of ancient tradition that has been largely ignored by the new elite, the oracular grove. Tucked away in a quiet corner of the main island is a small, grotto-like sanctuary dedicated to the original earth deities that were worshipped before Poseidon's arrival. Here, a small, marginalized order of priests and priestesses, the keepers of the old ways, interpret the will of the gods through signs and portents: the flight of birds, the rustling of leaves in a sacred tree, the patterns in smoke from a ceremonial fire. For centuries, their guidance was sought by the kings before any major decision. But now, their sanctuary is dusty and neglected. They are seen as relics, their methods archaic and superstitious in a city that prides itself on logic and engineering. But as the war drums begin to beat, the head priestess, a woman of great age and wisdom, feels a profound disturbance in the natural order. She requests an audience with the ruling council. After much delay, she is grudgingly granted one.
You are there as she stands before the council in the Great Hall of Governance. She is a stark contrast to the slick advocates and wealthy merchants who usually command this floor. Her robes are simple, her face is a mask of weathered lines, and she carries no scrolls of legal precedent. Her authority comes from a different source entirely. She speaks in a low, clear voice, a voice that seems to echo with the weight of ages. She doesn't speak of strategy or economics. She speaks of the signs. The sacred eels in the temple grotto have refused to eat. A flock of seabirds, which for centuries has nested on the cliffs of the central island, has abandoned its nests overnight. A strange, sour brine has begun to taint the water of the sacred cold spring. She interprets these portents as a clear warning from the divine powers. The land and the sea itself are protesting the city's arrogant turn. The planned invasion of Athens, she warns, is an act of supreme hubris that will offend the balance of the cosmos and bring ruin upon them all. She implores them to abandon their path of conquest and return to the old ways of humility and peace. This is the 17th crack, the moment a society actively mocks and rejects the very sources of its foundational wisdom. The council members do not listen with respect. They shift in their seats, exchange bored glances, and tap their fingers on their polished tables. When she is finished, the lead magistrate, the boy you once saw playing counsel in the gardens, does not thank her for her counsel. He smiles, a thin, condescending smile.
"Venerable Mother," he says, his voice dripping with false deference, "we appreciate your concern for the city's spiritual hygiene. But we now make our decisions based on rational analysis and strategic imperatives, not on the dietary habits of eels." A ripple of sycophantic laughter runs through the younger members of the council. The priestess is publicly ridiculed, dismissed as a senile old woman clinging to rustic superstitions. The very idea of an oracle, of a wisdom that transcends human logic, is treated as a joke, an embarrassment from a less enlightened time. The historical parallels are numerous and poignant. Think of Cassandra of Troy, cursed by the gods so that her true prophecies would never be believed, her warnings of the Trojan horse dismissed as madness. Or consider the story of the Roman senator who was warned by the augurs, priests who read the flight of birds, not to engage in a particular battle. Impatient, he famously retorted, "I will make my own omens," and led his legions to a catastrophic defeat. The active derision of sacred council is a classic symptom of a leadership that has become so enamored with its own intelligence that it believes itself infallible. The priestess stands for a moment in the echoing silence that follows the laughter. She gives them a look not of anger, but of profound, heartbreaking pity. She has delivered the final warning, and it has been thrown back in her face. She turns and walks slowly from the hall, her departure barely noticed as the council immediately moves on to discussing the logistics of naval supply lines. The symbolic weight of this moment is immense. Atlantis has now officially severed its last connection to any form of authority higher than itself. They have rejected the wisdom of their ancestors, the warnings of nature, and the counsel of the divine. They have plugged their ears with the wax of their own arrogance. Their world has become a closed loop, an echo chamber where the only voice they hear is their own, telling them how great, how intelligent, and how destined for glory they are. The city is now flying blind, at full speed, into a storm of its own making, having just thrown its only compass overboard for a laugh.
After the final warning has been mocked and dismissed, a strange and unsettling quiet seems to fall upon Atlantis. The frantic energy of the war preparations continues in the shipyards and barracks, but in the natural world, something is profoundly wrong. The vibrant, living pulse of the island, which you felt when you first arrived, has grown faint, replaced by an eerie stillness. You find yourself walking away from the city, into the countryside of the main island. This is the agricultural heartland, the domain of the farmers you saw humiliated in the law courts. The fields that should be lush and green are showing patches of brown. The air, which should be filled with the buzz of insects and the calls of birds, is unnervedly silent. You realize with a start that the background hum of life has ceased. You walk to the edge of the island, to the high cliffs overlooking the sea. The ocean, which has always been a constant rhythmic presence, is now unnaturally calm. The water is flat and glassy, like a sheet of dark, polished obsidian stretching to the horizon. There are no whitecaps, no gentle swells. The tides seem sluggish, hesitant. The seabirds that used to wheel and cry overhead are gone. The very air feels heavy, holding its breath. It is a perfect, beautiful day, but the perfection is that of a held moment before a terrible impact.
This is the 18th crack, and it is not a flaw in the city's morals or institutions, but a terrifying fissure in the fabric of reality itself. Nature is recoiling. The divine powers, having been ignored and ridiculed, have fallen silent. The world is giving Atlantis one last silent chance to notice that it has gone too far. You speak to an old fisherman mending his nets on a deserted beach. He has lived his whole life by the sea, and he is deeply troubled. "The sea is asleep," he whispers, his eyes scanning the horizon. But it is not a peaceful sleep. It is the sleep of a fevered man just before the shaking begins. He tells you the fish have vanished from the coastal waters. The dolphins that used to play in the bow waves of his boat have not been seen for weeks. He doesn't know the language of politics or philosophy, but he knows the language of the ocean, and it is speaking of a deep and terrible wrongness. This personification of nature, the idea that the physical world can react to human moral failings, is a powerful and ancient theme in mythology. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods decide to send a great flood to wipe out humanity precisely because their noise and wickedness are disturbing the divine rest. In many indigenous cultures, natural disasters are often interpreted not as random events, but as a direct consequence of a community falling out of balance with the natural and spiritual world. While modern science has given us geological explanations for earthquakes and tsunamis, the power of these myths lies in their metaphorical truth. A society that wages war on the natural principles of balance and humility will eventually face a violent correction.
The leaders in the city, of course, notice none of this. They're in their windowless council chambers, studying maps and calculating supply needs. They have insulated themselves so completely with their technology and their arrogance that they have lost all connection to the living world. If they notice the stillness of the sea, they probably see it as a good omen, a sign of calm waters for their invasion fleet. They are interpreting the world's fearful silence as its tacit approval. You stand on the cliff's edge as the sun begins to set. The sunset is spectacular, the sky painted in lurid shades of orange, purple, and a venomous-looking green. It is beautiful, but it is the beauty of a bruise. As the last sliver of the sun disappears below the unnaturally flat horizon, a profound and complete silence descends. No insects chirp. No night birds call. Even the wind dies. The entire world seems to be waiting. You look back towards the city. The orichalcum-plated domes and pinnacles catch the last strange light, glowing with a fierce, defiant beauty. The city seems to be celebrating itself, oblivious to the cosmic judgment that is gathering around it. The people are preparing for their feasts, their games, their glorious war. They have forgotten that they live on a small island in the middle of a vast and powerful ocean. They have forgotten that their magnificent civilization is a guest on this planet, not its master. And the planet has fallen silent, like a patient judge who has heard the final, damning piece of evidence and is now preparing to pronounce the sentence.
In this city of the blind, where arrogance has become the state religion and the world holds its breath, you find yourself seeking out a flicker of the old light. There must be someone left, you think, who remembers. Someone who has not been swept away by the tide of greed and hubris. Your search leads you to a forgotten corner of the old aristocratic quarter, to a modest, unadorned villa that seems to shrink from the grandiosity of its neighbors. This is the home of Amareus, the last of the old council, a man who voluntarily retired when he saw the direction the city was heading. You find him in his small, overgrown garden, tending to a patch of simple native herbs, not the exotic ornamental flowers favored by the new elite. He is ancient, his face a roadmap of grief and disappointment, but his eyes, when he looks at you, are clear and sane. He is the last man in Atlantis who is not mad. He is the final keeper of the city's conscience, a living relic of a time when virtue was valued more than gold. Spending time with Amareus is like stepping into a different reality. He doesn't speak of profits or politics. He speaks of the great balance, the principle the first kings understood so well, the balance between the divine and the human, between the city and nature, between ambition and humility. We were meant to be guardians, he says, his voice a dry whisper, not masters. We were a jewel set upon the sea, not a dagger pointed at its heart. He represents the city's last chance at redemption, a voice of reason crying in a wilderness of self-adulation. This is the 19th crack, but it's not a crack at all. It is the last single thread of gold holding the crumbling edifice together. It is the story of the one just man, the final sane voice. This figure is a powerful archetype in stories of societal collapse. Think of Noah in the biblical flood, Lot in the city of Sodom, or even Joe Gillis in Sunset Boulevard, the one character who sees the insanity for what it is.
Their tragedy is that their wisdom is useless. They are prophets without honor, their warnings dismissed as the ramblings of an old man out of touch with the modern world. Amaris is treated as an eccentric, a harmless fossil. The children of the elite sometimes peer over his garden wall to mock the old man who talks to his plants. The new council members speak of him with a mixture of pity and contempt as a symbol of the weak, sentimental past they have so proudly overcome. They cannot understand that his weakness, his humility, his empathy, his respect for tradition was once the very source of Atlantis' strength. You walk with him through the streets of the city at dusk. He is like a ghost, invisible to the bustling, self-important crowds. He looks at the towering new villas and shakes his head, not in anger, but in sorrow. They have built their own tombs, he murmurs, and plated them with oralcum to impress the worms. He watches the young men drilling for their unjust war and sees not soldiers, but sacrifices being fattened for a pyre of vanity.
Historians and philosophers still debate whether Plato included such a figure in his original, more detailed account of Atlantis, parts of which are believed to be lost. Did he imagine a dissenting voice, a wise elder who argued against the war with Athens? Such a character would have been a perfect foil to the city's hubris and a powerful dramatic device. In the absence of definitive text, this figure of the last good man remains a compelling and necessary part of the story's moral logic. As night falls, Amarius leads you to a small, hidden alcove overlooking the now silent sea. He performs a simple, ancient ritual, offering a prayer not to Poseidon the king, but to the spirit of the ocean itself, asking for forgiveness for his people. It is a futile gesture, a single candle lit in the face of a hurricane, but it is an act of profound moral courage. It is an affirmation that even when a whole society chooses madness, the choice to remain sane, to hold on to what is right, still has meaning. He is the city's memory, the living embodiment of all they have lost. His very existence is a quiet, powerful indictment of everything they have become. But he is one man, an old man, and his wisdom is a language that no one else in Atlantis speaks anymore. As he finishes his prayer, a single tear traces a path through the dust on his cheek. It is a tear for the city he loved, a city that is already dead, even as its citizens prepare for the greatest feast in its history.
The final night has come. The invasion fleet is set to sail at dawn, and the entire city of Atlantis is caught in a fever pitch of celebration. The council has declared a citywide festival to honor the gods, a transparently political move to ensure popular support for the war, and to celebrate the inevitable victory to come. Every square is lit with torches, every street echoes with music and laughter. The city has never felt more alive or more disconnected from reality. You find yourself drawn to the grand plaza before the Temple of Poseidon, the epicenter of the night's festivities. The scene is one of controlled chaos, a spectacle of supreme decadence. Fountains that usually flow with water now spout sweet, spiced wine. Tables groan under the weight of exotic foods from every corner of their trading empire. The air is thick with expensive perfumes and the arrogant pronouncements of the powerful. The merchant princes are there, competing to see who can provide the most extravagant entertainment. The magistrates are there, their legal gravitas forgotten as they drink from golden goblets. The high priests are there, offering loud theatrical blessings for the war effort. This is the final scene, the 20th and ultimate crack in the city's soul. It is the moment of peak hubris, the great manic feast before the fall.
The people are not just celebrating a military departure, they are worshiping themselves. They are toasting their own genius, their own wealth, their own power. Every song is a hymn to their greatness, every cheer a validation of their arrogance.
You see the young Strategos, the architect of the war, being carried on the shoulders of his officers. He holds a cup of wine aloft and makes a speech. "Tonight we feast," he shouts, his voice slurring slightly. "And tomorrow we sailed to bring the light of Atlantis to the dark corners of the world. The gods themselves envy our city and our strength. We are their equals." A deafening roar of approval rises from the crowd. It is a moment of pure, undiluted blasphemy. They are no longer the children of a god. They are his rivals. This image of a great, decadent feast before a catastrophe is a powerful and enduring trope in literature and history. It's Belteshazzar's feast from the book of Daniel, where the Babylonian king drinks from sacred temple vessels just before his kingdom is overthrown. It's the final, frantic party in Edgar Allan Poe's The Masque of the Red Death, where the nobles hide from a plague in a sealed abbey, only to find the disease has come to the party. It is the ultimate symbol of a people so blinded by their own pleasure and pride that they are oblivious to the doom gathering at their gates. As the Strategos speaks, you notice something that no one else seems to see. A fine tremor runs through the stone beneath your feet, so subtle it could almost be your imagination. The wine in the goblets shivers. Far out on the horizon, over the glassy, unnaturally calm sea, a line of darkness is gathering, a line that is not a cloud. The old fisherman's words echo in your mind. The fevered sleep before the shaking begins.
But no one here is looking at the horizon. Their gaze is fixed inward on the dazzling spectacle of their own creation. They have become so entranced by the artificial lights of their city that they haven't noticed the sun has set on their civilization. The quiet warnings of nature, the wisdom of their ancestors, the last pleas of the righteous, all have been ignored, drowned out by the rising crescendo of their own applause. They are trapped in the ultimate echo chamber, and the feedback loop has reached a fatal intensity. A servant automaton, one of the frivolous toys of the rich, glides through the crowd, flawlessly pouring more wine. It is a perfect symbol for the city itself, beautiful, sophisticated, technically brilliant, and completely without a soul. It continues its programmed task, oblivious to the trembling ground, just as the city continues its programmed path towards self-destruction. The party reaches a feverish peak. The music is louder, the laughter more manic. They are a people drunk on their own power, dancing on the edge of a volcano, convinced it is merely a stage for their grand performance. You look up at the silver-plated temple, at the golden pinnacles gleaming under the torchlight, and you know you are witnessing the end. The fall of Atlantis is not an accident of geology. It is a suicide. It is the inevitable physical consequence of a long and deliberate spiritual decay. The ocean is not coming to punish them for their sins. It is coming to reclaim a space that has been emptied of all grace, a space they have hollowed out themselves.
The noise of the feast begins to fade now, not abruptly, but as if you are slowly sinking into deep, quiet water. The frantic music softens, becoming a distant melodic hum. The sharp, flickering torchlight blurs into a gentle, pulsing glow, warm and orange like a fading ember. The trembling ground beneath your feet ceases to be a threat and becomes a soft, rhythmic rocking, like a cradle being gently pushed by an unseen hand.
The world of Atlantis, with its sharp edges of pride and its cold, hard gleam of orichalcum, begins to dissolve. The details lose their focus, melting into broad, impressionistic strokes of light and shadow. You are drifting now in that peaceful, weightless space between wakefulness and the true country of sleep. The story is over. The great city, with all its sound and fury, has receded, leaving only a faint echo, a half-remembered dream of silver towers and concentric rings of water. The tension in your shoulders can release. The tightness in your jaw can soften. There is nothing left to analyze, no more cracks to find, no more warnings to heed. There is only this quiet, this calm, this gentle descent. The air around you is soft and warm, and a feeling of profound peace settles over you, a quiet reassurance that the story has been told, and now it is time for rest. The final distant note of a horn from the doomed invasion fleet becomes the soft sigh of the wind outside your window. The roaring of the eventual tide becomes the steady, gentle hum of the fan in your room, a sound that promises not destruction, but deep, uninterrupted sleep. You are safe, you are comfortable, and you are drifting away, far, far away from the shores of that lost and ancient island.